Welcome to the fifth Hands-on Agile webinar. I'm your host, Stefan Volpes, and today we will talk about sprint planning anti-patterns. So before we start, a quick look at my mental model, how Agile product creation works. You start with a vision on the left side and you end up delivering product continuously to a resilient system on the right side. The left part of the arc I label product discovery, the right part is product delivery. That's nothing new. The two are not that separated. They typically overlap in the near-term planning or in Scrum speak in the product backlog. What I like to point at is that while product discovery is very affordable, the further to the left you go, you can create a vision on a napkin. Running experiments is getting really expensive the further to the right you move, as it requires a working delivery pipeline. So when we talk about risk mitigation, cost of delay, opportunity cost, misallocation of resources, we really want to move further to the right to mitigate these risks. So we started with product discovery anti-patterns, then we moved on to product backlog anti-patterns, and now we're talking about sprint planning anti-patterns. It's not as much about garbage in, garbage out. You will see there are some process issues that make this really an interesting point. The two webinars I refer to are both available on the YouTube channel as replays. So let's start my dirty dozen of sprint planning anti-patterns. Let's start with the first category, the product owner. Number one, no sprint goal. What comes first? The team selects stories from the product backlog and the PO wraps a sprint goal around them, or is it the other way around? The PO defines a sprint goal and the team picks the stories to match the sprint goal. According to the Scrum guide, it's a collaborative approach. The Scrum team also crafts the sprint goal. Given that the product owner has the prerogative of defining the priority, the product owner is an essential role in this part. In my experience, Scrum is really great at scoring match points. Match points, for example, providing PayPal to your customers as a payment option, always provide you with simple sprint goals, analog sprint goals. PayPal works or it's not working. However, if you're running into trouble identifying your sprint goal, and this is not just happening one time, but it's some kind of pattern, it repeats itself over and over again, probably because your product is already at the end of its life cycle and you're focusing on fixing bugs or making small adjustments. And you should really think about whether using Scrum or continue using Scrum is the right practice in your case. And I believe that the metric, yes, we were able to define a meaningful sprint goal. And by sprint goal, I'm not just referring to a random assortment of stuff. We want to make the site better or something like that, but a specific sprint goal that can be achieved, that is measurable. If that is no longer available, you should really think about moving on probably to a different form of working. Maybe Kanban is something better for you in this case. Number two, the spillover from the last sprint is not discussed. This is an interesting point. On the one side, related to the sunk cost fallacy, come on, we put so much effort into those stories of the last sprint. We're almost done. Let's finish them. But I believe that every story that spills over needs to be discussed. Is it still valuable? Is it still the best use of the team's time? If this is not happening, you're running some kind of time box Kanban, which is okay too, but you shouldn't call it Scrum. And there's another issue we will come back to at a later stage. The question why there is a spillover in the first place. Did the team run into dependencies? Was there too much taken on? Where the story is not refined enough, technical debt, capacity overestimated. Maybe people were on sick leave or people decided to quit the company or the project. Who knows? The issue is that spillovers are certainly an anti-pattern in and of itself. And you need to watch out for that. If that's a regular pattern, you need to address it. Number three, the pushy PO. If you're into velocity, and if you're using story points, you certainly will come to a point when someone asks you, probably PO, last time you picked 25 stories, now you're just picking 15 story points. How come? If we have a look into the Scrum guide, the number of items selected from the product backlog for the sprint is solely up to the development team. So no matter how hard the PO is pushing, he or she has absolutely no say over that. It's up to the developer to pick the right number of stories for the sprint backlog. If that individual is keeping on making these kind of pushy advances, it maybe results from a certain kind of utilization fetish that that individual is harboring. It creates tensions, it creates a chasm in the team, and it's a sign of distrust. The question that you should address with your Scrum Master probably is whether that person is a Scrum Master. Probably might be even misaligned incentives between the PO and the team, which actually should not happen, but is a quite common situation in a lot of organizations. Number 4, toying with the definition of ready. I believe the definition of ready is a very helpful working agreement, as it sets a quality standard. You shouldn't ignore it, particularly if it's a living document and the team is regularly coming back to it and adjusting it to the needs of the Scrum team. However, you should not overdo this product owner versus developer game. Ignoring the definition of ready is really causing havoc during the sprint. You don't want to do that. If you keep it at the haggling level, I believe it's totally fine. If you use the definition of ready as a kind of tool to create a stalemate, then it's really an anti-pattern because you're all playing on the same team. For example, imagine that your definition of ready requires that all designs need to be available before a story is considered to be sprint backlog worthy. And you have a very valuable story. And all that's missing is one of several designs, and your designer is telling you, okay, I can deliver this within the next 2 days. I'm already working on it. If you reject the story, probably the story with the highest value for the next sprint, because not all designs were available at this moment, I believe you're using the definition of ready as a kind of stage gate, and this is not the purpose of it. Number 5, someone else is imposing the forecast on the team. A non-team member, maybe a line manager, defines the scope of the sprint backlog and not the Scrum team. Popular, for example, is that a manager shows up and reports about random deadlines from the higher level of the management that need to be met to deliver a certain feature or make a certain part of the application available. And like a good sign of Taylorism, the foreman is telling you what to do and which stories to pick to actually make this happen and satisfy the higher levels of the management. If this is happening, you're certainly not applying Scrum, and it's certainly not Agile, but probably you are working in a feature factory, and you should absolutely address this in a retrospective because it absolutely needs to stop. Number 6, overcommitment by the team. The development team takes on too many product backlog items. Very likely this is going to result in a spillover at the end of the sprint, and often the sprint goal will also not be achieved either. Try to understand the reason for this, why it could happen in the first place. Is this pure optimism instead of capacity planning? Is the team running into unexpected technical debt? Were user stories not refined well enough? Was the team trying to show its usefulness to the organization by being busy and taking on a lot of stuff? The problem with overcommitment is, while reaching out for ambitious goals is a good thing, it actually ruins a lot of the metrics that would allow the team to become better at what it's doing. For example, lead time and cycle time are really affected by overcommitment and resulting spillovers. My tip, take on less, focus on the sprint goal, just pull in new product backlog items the moment you will be running out of work after accomplishing the sprint goal. Anything else, any kind of upfront commitment, forecast, whatever, that you will not be able to deliver is an anti-pattern. Number 7, variable sprint length. Sizing the sprint length after the sprint goal looks smart in the beginning. However, it results in a confusing cadence of ceremonies, delivery capabilities, and overall team predictability. It's highly distracting to stakeholders, for example, sprint review attendees. And again, it makes a lot of metrics hard to provide some kind of normalization to actually make them comparable. Again, it's mainly lead time, cycle time, probably velocity too. I don't think that doubling the sprint length at the end of the year over the holiday period is an anti-pattern. It's rather a pragmatic solution. But generally, picking varying sprint length is a critical problem. Number 8, the sprint planning is not a team event. The sprint planning is handled by a subset of the team members, for example, the product owner and, air quotes, the team lead. Unless you are using large-scale Scrum, and this is the overall sprint planning, this is a true anti-pattern for a simple reason, because it's the Scrum team that is picking the stories from the backlog, and there is, of course, no team lead in Scrum teams in that respect. Although older organizations, let me put it this way, are still handing out business cards where someone is labeled team lead and they're believing that they are something different within the team hierarchy. So, not a team event. Number 9, no capacity check for the sprint planning. This is a classic. No one keeps track of the available capacity, and later on you figure out that people are either on holiday or on workshops, or that they go through training, or that they probably are somewhere else, or like it. Again, it results typically in overcommitment. It's sending a false signal to stakeholders. It very likely results in spillovers. And again, it renders lead time, cycle time as metrics basically useless. And if you repeat this, it really creates a serious trust issue in my experience. It's the easiest way to embed collaboration with stakeholders, because for a very simple reason, reliability is the number one issue stakeholders want from you. Maybe it's not so important whether you deliver a feature in 6 or 8 weeks, but if you say you deliver in 6 weeks, they will trust in you and they will base their own planning on a delivery in 6 weeks' time. If you're not managing to do that, they will very quickly lose trust. And then you have these old kind of politics and blame game back into the equation, which you really want to avoid at all costs. Number 10, no slack time. If I remember Reinhardtson right, the system's throughput is, the maximum of a system throughput is achieved around the utilization level of probably 80%. Anything beyond that will actually reduce the throughput for a very simple reason, because there is no flexibility built into the whole system to handle disruptions like urgent bugs or small product increments that you need to deliver in between. No slack time means there's less pairing, less knowledge sharing, it's less teamwork, but the utilization level forces the team basically to split up in a more individual mode. And then we talk about individual working at an assembly line again. So you need to have slack time, and that's the rule of thumb is about 20%. Number 11, the allocation of capacity. This is basically the extension of the slack time discussion. How do you allocate available resources to the sprint planning? The rule of thumb is that if you have 20% slack time and probably 20% for bugs and refactoring, so maintenance, it leaves you with about 60% for new features, no more. And I believe it's critical for a Scrum team to defend this kind of allocation of the available resources at all cost, for a very simple reason. If you invest more than the 60% in new features, you may deliver really great results for the first 3 months. And after that, technical debt and bugs are catching up with you. And then basically the progress that you can deliver in 4, 5, 6 months down the road is basically coming to a halt. And you can't escape technical debt. And it's a feature of a feature factory. The product management, the product owners are more interested in shipping new features than actually keeping the code base in a working fashion. So allocation of capacity, too much on new features, not enough on slack time and maintenance. Number 12, sprint planning 2. Sprint planning 2 is typically the moment when the developers start having a look at the sprint backlog and maybe come up with some ideas who will be working on what, and maybe create some subtasks, etc. pp. If there's no planning at all, it's always problematic because it's a bit, I think, less efficient. And if there's too much planning, if everything 100% is planned in advance, it's probably waste. So my suggestion always is to keep it somewhere between 30 and 60%. That is totally fine. Think about that. You may add a new task to the sprint backlog at any given time. Maybe you have a serious bug or a feature needs to be delivered earlier that wasn't available or the team didn't know of during the sprint planning. If you prepare everything at 100% level, you probably create waste. Let me quickly wrap up the sprint planning anti-patterns. There's no sprint goal, number 1. Number 2, the spillover is not discussed. Number 3, you have a pushy PO. Number 4, you're toying with the definition of ready. Number 5, externals impose a forecast on the team. Number 6, the team overcommits. Number 7, variable sprint length. Number 8, the sprint planning is not a team event. Number 9, no capacity check. Number 10, no slack time. Number 11, the allocation of capacity. And number 12, it's the sprint planning too.